Okay, everyone out there, here we are at the DC booth over here on the Gotham side of things. We are about to do the last of today's DC. We're going to do a Art Academy, and we have one of our great DC artists here. If you can't see his name here, it's right here. It's Brad Walker. So come on, gather close. We're going to let you get, there's also a chance to get some free art. So I don't know if you knew that was part of the deal, that we're going to give out your art at this point.
No, but I think free is a magic word.
Is
in this
it?
Place.
Yeah, right. Well,
people will come.
It means that you can do whatever you want. They're getting their money's worth, right? Yeah. So come on over, gather closely. Brad's going to go through. Now, it is artist discretion. We don't try to force you into anything. What character would you like to draw for us today?
I'm going to draw Batman.
Oh, right. Okay, cool. Well, as you may or may not know, Batman is the very first inductee into the Comic-Con Museum Hall of Fame. And if you haven't done so, you should take a day trip out over to Balboa Park. We see the Batmobiles, all the Batman costumes from the movies. We have comic books over there from the vault. All that's happening right now, and that's free of charge. Now, an interesting thing when I was looking back at your credits, because I think, Brad, I first became aware of you, I think in the New 52 era, where you were doing things like Green Lantern and Sinestro and things like that.
Yeah.
But you actually got your very first DC credit on Detective Comics.
Yeah, that was my first. Oh, I got louder.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay.
Louder's better in this booth.
Yeah.
That was my first stuff that I broke in on was 2 backup stories on Detective 795 and 796, I think.
That's right.
And so that was exact. So I got this job on Detective on the stuff that I'm working on now late last year. So that was 2017, and I figured out. No, 2018, sorry.
Yeah.
And I figured out my first job was in 2003, so 15 years earlier. And then I started reading Batman, was the first comics that I read. It was exactly 15 years before that.
So there are these 15-year cycles for you
I
on
didn't
this
realize
thing.
the math until I got that
that's
last
crazy.
job.
Well, that was one of the questions I'm going to ask you. I mean, for most of us, Batman growing up was one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Is that the main comic you collected when you were a kid, or?
That was the first. I mean, I got into everything so quickly.
Sure.
I started Batman in the late 80s. And,
Well, it was
and I
an
just
amazing
started,
era of Batman.
Yeah. And there was so much because I started then, and suddenly the movie was coming out, and my friends and I were losing our mind for it, and then the sequels and animated series. I was just saying this on the Batman panel.
Right.
There was no way as a kid to escape the influence of Batman.
No, because there was a point when there was Batman merchandise everywhere, and there hadn't been stuff like that.
And of all
the 60s.
kinds, and it all we were saying on the panel also, it you can make Batman work in so many different directions and tones, and it's such a versatile concept because at its core it's very simple. It's a guy who, when something bad happened to him, he did what we all sort of want to do in those moments. You know, that moment where somebody says something and then the next day you're in the shower and you're like, oh, I should have said.
Right.
The concept of Batman is that he said that thing.
Yeah. There is a German word for finding the perfect thing to say, or the thing you should have. Was it words on the stairs or something like that? The things you think of later on through that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This was a period when I was first buying comics, and Batman was a character I knew, but it was bam, bam, bam. You have Frank Miller's Dark Knight, you have Killing Joke, you have Mike Barr and other people, and Kelly Jo. I mean, you have all this great Batman art coming through.
Yeah.
Now, where were you growing up and buying comics?
So there, my father was in the Air Force, so we moved around like crazy. So there, I was in Colorado.
Yeah.
And we moved to outside of LA, Riverside area, pretty shortly after that. So, I mean, that was my comic store touring era. Was
PXs and stuff around the world, or just over in Riverside?
Oh, in Riverside. I mean, everywhere I would go, that
Yeah.
would be one of the stops, is I'd find a comic store. But yeah, the whole greater LA area, you know, back in the day, there were so many comic stores, and you could spend a weekend after you got your driver's license just going to different comic stores. But now it's a little. I live in.
Oh, Treppenwood. Okay.
I live in New York City now, and when I moved there, I remember that was 2002. I remember looking in the phone book,
Yeah.
and I wrote down all the comic stores that I could find, and you could go to so many comic stores. And now there's probably 5.
Right, right. Well, you know,
6
that's
comic
funny
stores.
because that's the great classic story where Gotham City comes from.
Yeah.
Bill Finger is looking for a city. He's trying to make it up. He thought it should be a more generic name or something that wasn't New York. He got tired of calling it that. And he flips through a phone book and finds Gotham Jewelers and says, yeah, that's it, Gotham. That works.
Oh, yeah.
So-
I've been reading, so when I got on the book, I decided to really immerse myself in Batman, and I bought a bunch of back issues from eras that I didn't have and filled in holes that I didn't have, and I bought the animated series Blu-ray that had just come out, and I just, my whole recreation when I wasn't working, it's probably very unhealthy, was all Batman.
No, I understand.
And I started
spent
reading.
a year reading 1,000 detective comics, and it's like if you watch too much Sopranos, it starts to get into your DNA, and you just suddenly have Batman-like reactions to things. What was there any treasures you found that you weren't expecting?
Well,
I mean,
so
runs that.
I've been reading the Jerry Conway and Don Newton and Gene Colan stuff.
Yeah, those are excellent.
And Jerry Conway, very much, it's New York City.
Yeah.
When he says the name, he refers to it as Gotham City, but he talks about Jersey being over the river. He talks about, the turnpike. He talks about very specific landmarks that are very.
Well, that's the
trite
weird
area.
reputation is that Gotham City is actually in New Jersey. People from New Jersey don't ever let that go, but we put it out there a few times with that. But yeah,
Let
that's
them have something.
Well, that's the other thing I would say to you. If you love these characters, go back and find there are eras that have somehow slipped through the cracks or other people aren't aware of. Don't just read the famous stuff. Go back and read all of it because it's so illustrative. So when you were first doing those backups in Detective, you got Orpheus, right, as the gang leader?
Right.
But you had some of the other Bat characters and stuff around in Gotham City.
Yeah, I got to do a little bit of classic stuff. It definitely, I didn't come in with an expectation because I was getting my first work and I was getting to draw Batman. I didn't sit there and stamp my feet that I wanted an archetypal Joker story or something.
But it didn't take long because you go from that into Legends of the Dark Knight, right? I mean, you get a traditional Batman book pretty quickly.
It was on they were doing a crossover, and what a great way to break somebody in. You sort of like trial by fire, throw everything at them that they can. So those things are always such a headache, but because I started on them, my experience in comics is incorporating other people's stories and waiting for another artist to design a character or a location or something like that. So it was probably helpful in the sense that it was the most difficult, headachy way to experience comics, and I experienced the worst of it first, so.
It's best to have that baptism of fire and jump all the way in, right? I mean, you can't have more of a high stakes than doing Batman. Now, you've loved the character, you had an initial idea of how to draw it, but here you are now doing Detective Comics again, and what has changed with how you approach drawing Batman?
Well, it was kind of nice because I look back at those detective issues, those backups and the Legends of the Dark Knight stuff, and I cringe. My stuff was terrible at the time, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just flying by the seat of my pants. So it is a nice thing to come back to a character that I love, that I did get to work on, but didn't do what I would like to have done. And it was, like I said, it was like parts of a crossover. So I drew like part 4 and then part 8, and you're not telling a story, you're contributing art to something. But so it's nice to come back and working on Detective now. Peter Tomasi and I are friends, and we talk on the phone, and he talks about an idea that he has and wants to go in a direction, and we discuss how to play that visually and how something could work in the art.
Well, that's amazing because not enough people have that kind of conversation going on anymore. It's often scripts via email. You maybe talk to your editor, but you guys get along and are working on this, and you're pitching ideas back and forth to each other about what would work and what we should go for. And
I think it's the best possible kind of situation, and I'm sure that there are people who just their personalities don't lean that way, and they just want to be left alone to do their thing. But I think probably more common is I think it's better to collaborate and to blur the line between who is contributing what, and if both people are gracious and are not going to be offended that I put in that part, I said
Yeah.
that thing, then I think your results are going to.
Well, I think there's the other part where you, any writer worth their salt has these original ideas, and even if it was film instead of comic books, once you see a performance, you have to adapt and realize there are ideas possible that you didn't see. And once they see the artist in play and what they're bringing to this, it opens up a whole new set of possibilities.
Yeah.
Had you wanted to work with Pete for a long time? Is that?
Yeah, I'd been a fan of his work for a while, and I was primarily familiar with it, I guess, from his Green Lantern stuff, and then his Superman run that he was on just before he came on Detective.
Right.
And for whatever reason, his Batman and Robin run had slipped through the cracks for me. So they asked me about the job last year in San Diego, and I was really excited to do it. And I thought, well, I'll take a look at what his take on Batman is like. And it was great because you buy those trades and it's got his script printed in the back. So you can look at those trades from his Batman and Robin run, and you can read the script page, and you can refer to what Pat Gleason did. And you can see exactly, I got a sense of what he wants to get from a story. I got a sense of sort of like his visual, the pace of his visual.
Well, you see, most people can take the script and do a little bit of the deconstruction from the image back to the script and see the differences. But you're thinking of this as a continuity artist. You can really pick up where the choices were and what other choices could have been made.
Yeah, you don't have that luxury. I'm sure I could have reached out to Pete and said, hey, can I see one of the scripts?
Yeah.
And I could have done it that way. But it's nice that they print those in the back, and I think it's certainly an interesting tool for people who are interested in the medium and the construction of the thing.
Right.
So it was really helpful. And then by the time I started, he and I would get on the phone and we would talk. And he lives just north of New York City, and I live in the city. So we got together in person once or twice, and these are biweekly.
Yeah.
So they're coming
I know,
fast
so
and furious.
yeah.
So by the end, we had like 3 weeks to do this last one. So he wrote a pretty loose plot. And we sat down and we talked it out, and we go, okay, this needs a page, and we can break into a 2-page spread here, and we talked about the whole thing. And I just think it's ideal. Obviously, that's not the kind of thing with people living
No, but it's also the
everywhere.
great fantasy. All those great Teen Titans scripts where that George and Marv are getting together in a diner and talking it out. You know, like it's the fantasy of all that. Now, when you go to draw Batman, what's the first thing you start with? Where do you focus in?
I'm a shapes person. Okay. And so you can see when you look at this back, I block in sort of like the shape of the head, and you do it pretty loosely, and then which direction the shoulders are going to go, and you sort of build up from there. It's sort of the opposite of sculpting, I think. And I don't think what I do is uncommon, but
the posture there, he's got an intensity to it. There's a tightness in him. Even though he's got this flowy cape, there's like a rage underneath here.
Yeah, you want to... stiffness is always something that you want to fight in drawing, and the more straight up and down a character is, not only does it look stiff, it looks unrealistic and unnatural, and certainly less dynamic. So, if you turn one part, then you turn the other part, and then you turn, you cock the figure all the way down, and you can watch it as you do it. If you sat there and do that with yourself, you can see the dynamic pose sort of like take shape.
All right, so one of the other key things to drawing Batman, one of the most sort of discussed between various artists and styles, really it's two things. What are your feelings about the length of the bat ears, and who does the best capes, and why do you do your cape the way you do it?
I think when I started, I did these Twitter threads to just sort of talk about Batman because I wanted to. Yeah. And we discussed the ears for a while, and I don't think there's a wrong answer.
No, they all look great.
I think it's all taste-based, but a lot of my influence for Batman comes from late 80s, early 90s, and I think there's been such a heavy influence from Dark Knight Returns and Year One for a long time now, and I take nothing away from those, but I think we've seen a lot of like bulky, built like a tank Frank Miller Batman, and the David Mazzucchelli, just the very short cropped ears. And I wanted to pull from some areas that we hadn't probably seen as much. And I like one of the things I love about most characters, but Batman specifically, is there's so many elements of Batman, and you'll see creative interpretations that lean really heavily into one, and it'll be like, this is a very vigilante, like a dark, gritty take. But to me, the beautiful thing about Batman is that he's a vigilante. He's a crime fighter. He's a superhero. He's a creature of the night. You know, when all those things come together, the synergy of that is what I love so much about Batman. So I wanted to pull little pieces of everything.
Yeah.
I wanted to have him, you know, hunch and move like he's doing everything quietly and secretly and things like that, rather than, you know, like I said, so much of the more recent visual interpretations are this beast of a guy.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, he knows jujitsu early on. He is a stealth fighter as well.
Yeah.
And he also really is one of the great composite characters. There's a lot of things about Batman that if you take any one element, they're not completely original, but it's the synthesis of pulp with comic strips, with bits of old other characters, but all thrown in together, and he's a father figure. Do you enjoy drawing Robins as well? I mean, there's a whole cast of Robins and stuff in that comic.
Yeah, and we used Damian really heavily in our arc, and Pete obviously has a very
real feel for that character,
beloved history with Damian. And he was one of those characters, Pete said on the panel just now, and I had the same experience where I didn't really get Damian until I started working with Damian.
Right.
And then and I'll meet other fans who are like, oh, I don't like Damian.
I know.
And I'm like, just give him a couple issues and you'll get it. You know, and it's a fun, they were saying on the panel, Batman's history with Robins, Batman's creation of Robins is sort of like his crowning achievement, that he's made people that are less broken than he was by similar experiences. Right. And all the other Robins are characters that he was hardening. You know, he makes Dick Grayson and Tim Drake are all much lighter than him, and he hardens them. And Damian's the opposite end, where Damian is like just the crime fighter aspect, and Bruce is softening him. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, and Damian's very unique.
And there's something great about the whole Damian Dick Grayson team too, as one of the all-time Batman greats.
Yeah.
So. But no, I think one of the keys to understanding Batman is Robin. You had a question? What?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Who is your favorite Aquaman colorist?
I don't have one, sir.
I think that was a loaded question from an Aquaman colorist.
That was a plant.
Yes.
He was a plant.
Okay, so we're going to give this piece out. We need to ask a Batman question. The trivia question we're going to ask is... What should we ask here? We'll ask... Jason Todd, when retconned, first introduction was that he was a circus performer, and his parents were circus performers and died. It was too much like Dick Grayson's origin. So when he was reintroduced, Batman caught him doing what? That is correct. I'm going to give it to this man right here. He stole tires.
We
from
can't
the
give the
Batmobile.
sketch to the guy in the Spider-Man shirt over the guy in the Batman shirt.
You thought that was an accident, right? No, just kidding. We didn't hold anything against it, because the top one's a Kirby character, the other one's Ditko. Those are made men with me. So you are the exciting winner of this original piece of art. So since we're going to wrap up for today, I'm really excited with the run you're doing right now on Detective, and it's like obviously the coolest thing. You're working on the flagship title. This is like a piece of history, the longest running comic book in history.
Yeah, that's another thing that's cool about being on Detective specifically, is it's one of the last titles that feels like a part of history. And I was going through and buying up, issue 510, and to think that I'm drawing the cover of 1001 while I buy this. It was such a cool thing.
No, it's amazing, because if you don't know this, the name DC comes from Detective Comics. We were almost idiots. We almost canceled it at one, but staffers said, "Are you crazy? You're named for Detective Comics." They went, "Okay, you know what? Maybe we can just cancel Batman Family and move it in there." Basically, everybody, I want to give it up for Mr. Brad Walker here. Thank you so much for spending your time informing everybody. And also, one of the other things I appreciate that you're still, even at this stage, a student of the character. Because I went back and read these things, and they are a joy, and I think everybody should.
Oh, there's nothing I love more than reading an old run of comics.
I mean, by the way, that stuff in the 50s and 60s that people used to be embarrassed of, that stuff is awesome. Those are some crazy cool stories, and they did it in just 13 pages sometimes. Right? So, amazing. All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
Fred, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cool.